Hello and good afternoon, everyone. This is Kristina Kuprina with the biweekly economic update. This one is preparing for a post-COVID economy. But before I get into preparing for the post-COVID economy, I'd like to talk a little bit about what's happened over the last couple of weeks because lots of things have changed. But first, before doing that, I want to give a little bit of a disclaimer for those that are new and those who maybe don't know me as well. When I'm talking about the topics I'm talking about today, I'm speaking of this from an economist standpoint. I believe in financial consciousness. That is what we at Sequoia are about, and that's who I am as a person. And I'm well aware of the fact that there are many different ways of seeing this, many different viewpoints. So I just want to be sure, I'm saying this all is coming from the economist viewpoint, and there are many different ways to see some of the things that I'm talking about today. No one being the right one. With that being said, what's happened in the last couple of weeks? The markets have begun to stabilize. They've kind of stayed in a consistent place. Some companies are doing well, others are struggling. We'll talk a bit more about that later. But the biggest change of all has actually been with the fact that some of the states have begun reopening. The federal government some weeks back made it very clear that it was going to be the state's decision to make. And many of the states have just made decisions in different ways. Some are already open, full, almost entirely with some social distancing and safety protocols in place. Others are taking it slowly, step by step. Others haven't made any changes at all. So what we have is different states doing different things for different reasons. Now, the benefit to that is well, there's some people jump in the pool before others. What will happen with this? The risk of that being, however, if it goes on for too long, the impacts on companies and individuals in the states that take longer to open or to get back to normal, to whatever degree they should, could see a shift in people moving or businesses moving out of the area. So with that being said, it's kind of the backdrop is that change has happened. And I'm going to just pick a little bit on some. So some states have opened at this point, and others are gingerly stepping into it. I could focus a little bit on California because California was kind of interesting. Our governor said a couple weeks ago, that's it, we're not opening anything up until the end of May. And it turns out that he kind of went back on that and changed his mind. A large part of it could be the fact there was a lot of pushback. There were pushback in protests, and there were also pushbacks with counties saying that they weren't going to open up whether or not he wanted them to open. So some of the counties, and even counties that weren't opening, businesses and individuals were starting to go about their way. Why is this? In a state as, let's say, progressive or liberal as California is, why would you have so much pushback towards the government, especially a government that they support? By and large, this whole entire time economically has affected people very, very differently. It's affected people, as I mentioned before, health, the social aspect, and the economic aspect. The people that are most affected economically are those that, well, quite frankly, didn't really have a lot of room to be affected. People that are generally at the lower end of the income scale in the service business, lost their jobs, were furloughed, or had their hours significantly reduced. Okay, by and large. People who worked in the technology sector or businesses where they could work remotely kept their jobs and saw little, if any, impact to their incomes. People who live off of money from the government or Social Security or a pension were in a different boat than people whose businesses had to shut down. So there's a lot of variations in how this impacted people from just the economic aspect. The social and the health impact, I think we're all well aware of. There are some people at far more risk than other people, but the risk of spread is for all, right, or nearly all. So I'm going to focus on the economic, again, more of my area of expertise, and talk about what's likely to happen as everyone kind of goes their own way on how they're opening up. But before I do that, I just want to talk about one thing. We have had things like this in the past where we've had major disease outbreaks. One I was actually looking at, because I was looking back at the history of inflation, because that's something that's going to be a big deal for us in the next couple of years, was back when we had at least the Hong Kong flu, 68, 69. In that time, 100,000 people in the United States died. 100,000 people died during Hong Kong flu. And our population back then was like 200 million people. So it was a smaller population. But we didn't shut down then. And I'm not taking a position whether the right or wrong thing was done. I'm simply saying we didn't. In fact, an interesting thing to consider is Woodstock was going on in that time. Now, that's probably the absolute opposite of social distancing, but we didn't shut down then. Why were things done differently this time? I think it's going to be something talked about for years and years and years and analyzed after the fact. Was this done in the best possible way? What were the impacts? And we truly never will know, but it certainly will be analyzed. But it has happened. It's done and gone. You can't put the toothpaste back in the toothpaste tube after the fact. So what do we do going forward? So the government had an extraordinary stimulus, almost unheard of levels of stimulus, especially on the Federal Reserve level. It's hard to really define what that is, but the amount of money that's available in the system to prevent collapse of businesses, of municipalities, of even individual industries right now is stunning. It's vastly greater than the 2.2 trillion and more to come that's being done by the federal level. Why is this important? It's important because we had a risk of a collapse in the mortgage markets. We had a risk in a collapse in even the municipal markets. We had a huge risk and collapse of the bond markets. All levels of securities were at risk because the idea of the entire economy shutting down and how that would affect the flows of money. So backstopping is not bailing out. Backstopping is saying we're here to make sure there's not a collapse due to something completely beyond the control of the companies or municipalities that were affected. So if a company doesn't plan for a rainy day, if a company takes on too much debt, if a company doesn't plan for a recession or a downturn or technological innovations, anything like that, then the company will fail. That's how capitalism works. But when a company is forced to shut their doors due to government policy, there is a little bit of a thought of maybe the government's sort of responsible for this and what should they do to help assist these companies. That's obviously a big thing to figure out. It's a big balance because, how much do you do and where do you stop is something that's debatable in a lot of different circles and for a lot of different reasons. But just the fact that they were going to sit there and say, we are going to backstop this if it's because of the government shutdown, made a big difference. And it's why we have the degree of stability we have right now. It would have been far, far different had that not taken place back in March. They've also made it very clear that they will do whatever else is needed going forward if there's a continuation of this. Now I'm going to go over to the federal government for a moment here because we all know about what's already happened. Now what's coming next? Well, they're not officially talking, but they're talking. The Democrats and Republicans, the Senate and Congress are talking about the next big stimulus. They're bending about numbers like 1 trillion at this point, but it's sure to grow. I'll get a little bit into the risks of that down the road, but what they're talking about this time, the focus is going to be largely on the effects that this has had on states and municipalities. Okay, and it's been two ways. Number one, the costs of buying the supplies that are necessary and preparing their economies and their hospitals and their first responders and whatnot to care for the possibility of a big influx in cases or big surge in cases. At this point, we've really only had one region that's actually had that 10 degree, which was New York, but nobody knew. And in the absence of knowing, they did the right thing, again, economically, socially, which they took action. But there was a great cost. At the same time, they shut down the economy. And I say they, federal government, state government, local governments, counties and whatnot, made their own decision, but they shut down the economy, which dried up the revenue. So they got it from two ends, major expenses, and the revenue dried up. In addition, most cities and states and municipalities don't necessarily run, let's just call it prudent budgets. There's no reward for stocking up a lot of money for what ifs. And there's no political reward for it, and there's no reward from the constituents. They want money spent on the things that they want and need. So some parts of the country have been at high risk for a long period of time. There's been tremendous fiscal mismanagement. You have to pick on the state of Illinois is an area that's been in trouble much longer. And we can contrast that with California that had a pretty big rainy day fund that they were saving up. But regardless, that fund if it's not gone now, it will likely be gone by the time that this is all over. And this was an idea is that the government made a decision to shut down, but didn't really fully impact the fiscal results of this. So the fiscal weaknesses in our governments across the nation, in addition to the fiduciary weaknesses in our governments across the nations, are going to be laid bare by this situation. So it's almost like the second wave of this. And I'm not saying the second wave of COVID cases. I'm saying the second wave of financial concern is going to be around that. So the next topic that's being discussed right now, which will take time because, as you can imagine, this will be debated extensively, is how and where to put stimulus funds towards cities and states and municipalities. And that, again, we'll be watching that unfold quite a bit coming up. I bring this up. The markets have been relatively stable, and the reason for this is that even at current prices, even with the recovery that we've had over the last month, in a broad sense, the markets are pricing in a 40 to 60% drop in revenues with companies. Now, some companies' revenues are going to drop 80%, which is pretty much what was priced in previous month in March. And some companies are actually rising. So collectively, there's a huge dispersion, I mentioned this before, between who's successful now, who's going to be very successful going forward, but markets haven't quite figured it out yet. That's the place to invest. And who's going to be struggling for the foreseeable future. Believe it or not, many of the cruise ships are booking up next year. Go figure, right? I remember after 9/11, and every ship said, nobody will travel again. It'll be different. Airlines will struggle for years and years. It'll never be the same, never be the same. And before this happened, more people traveled than ever in history. So the idea that things will be the same as they are now forever. Now, I'm certain that the cruise ships will take on tremendous amounts of protocol and policies, not only to comply with what the governments will require for safety, but also what their passengers will require for comfort and convenience. Some of you have heard me talk about this before, but in this area of talking about what companies are going to do that are affected now to bring people back, it's going to be amazing stuff, because if you go to the store, to the grocery store, it's a whole different experience than it was a couple of months ago. Yeah? You stand in line 6 feet apart, everybody's in a mask waiting to get into the store. When you get in the store, you hope what you came to get is actually in stock. You grab it as quickly as possible, trying to dodge everybody else that's in a less than 6 foot aisle, grab what you need, and check out. It's not a really fun, pleasant experience as people run around sanitizing everything that you've touched, your cart and whatnot. It's not really fun. And with all respect to the grocery stores and the people working there, because they're doing their very best in a difficult situation, and quite frankly, putting themselves at risk. So this was, again, with all respect to them, it's still not a fun experience to go shopping. So how is this going to be different? Even after the government releases restrictions, people aren't going to all just jump back in the pool. And it's going to be very interesting to see how they're going to make the experience of us feeling safe, healthy, and clean to make it an experience that attracts us to shop at their location, or to visit that movie theater, or to any other events that we go to. Restaurants will be doing their own unique ways of making us feel safe and secure and pampered in this environment. So to take it from a uncomfortable situation to a experience is going to be something that the successful businesses, small and large, are going to do going forward. In the technology sector, you've seen this shift, obviously overnight, essentially, from working together to working remotely for industries and businesses that could do so. A lot of the stocks that are in this space are, at this point, very comfortably valued, if not overvalued. But going long term, how is that going to change? Not just how many of these types of calls do we do as opposed to face-to-face meetings, but how many things switch within the workforce as employment laws catch up with this new reality. Because it's quite a bit more, I should say, than just the COVID part of it. The environment is affected by this as well. Santa Clara County is trying to find ways to encourage businesses to keep their workforce working remotely as long as possible, because the air quality is cleaner. And many people that work in Silicon Valley commute quite a distance to get there. Sitting in traffic, that's a quality of life thing. So there's long-term thoughts towards this in businesses, and municipalities like counties and states are looking at how can we do more of this? How can our work week change? How can we go back or have an option to do 10-hour, 4-day work weeks remotely, because you're not sitting in traffic? So those extra couple hours working during the day, you're not in your car. How will the workplace change? How our communication? You still can do face-to-face meetings. You can still do team meetings face-to-face when safe to do so. But how can the average person's work week get better? 3/4 of my team are working remotely right now, and they like it. It's pretty cool. It's fun. And we seem to be working just fine doing our business this way. We all miss being face-to-face. So how going forward could we have a balance between both of those worlds? So I'm bringing this stuff up because this is talking about a little bit what's going to be going forward, the economies as well. I want to remind you, don't forget to put questions in, because I'm going to talk for roughly a half an hour, maybe a little longer, and then I'm going to start answering questions. Some people sent them to me in advance. So by the way, you can always do that, and I will form them into what I'm talking about. Please use the chat function to send questions, and I will answer as many of them as possible as I talk about these things. So going forward, What we don't know is, will there be a significant resurgence in cases? Okay, that's the question on everybody's mind as we begin to open up. And I want to stress, we will see a large increase in coronavirus or COVID-19 cases. This will happen. I can already predict the news a week or two out. It's going to say, in the states that open, COVID cases skyrocket. You know, it has to be some dramatic news media words there. But it will. And why? Because testing is also ramping up. And the more people we test, the more people we know are sick. And that's what exactly is seen happen when they tested, I apologize, I can't remember the name of the battleship or aircraft carrier ship, when they tested everybody, the cruise ships where they've tested everybody. When they've had cases that were isolated, they test everybody. It's happened in a local market in Santa Cruz County. It happened in the meatpacking plants in the Midwest. When they can test a large group of people, the case count rockets. Why? Because so many asymptomatic people. And if they're testing for antibodies, many people have had it, never knew they had it because we weren't testing or they didn't know about it, and have now potentially, again, I'm not going to take up an opinion on something I'm not an expert in, potentially even immune going forward. So case levels will skyrocket in the states that opened up as testing also ramps up. Please don't be alarmed by that. What we want to watch closely is hospitalization rates as a percent of population and death rates. Most importantly, death rates, because hospitalization rates can happen with anything, including the flu. But what are our death rates? Are they staying reasonably stable, or are they skyrocketing in the states that open? And how will other states figure this out? Again, enough opinions on this. You don't need to hear mine. We don't know. We will see. A massive spike in death rates would almost certainly cause people to close back up again, which will have a majorly significant impact on the economy. Because one time, two times would be a lot different. So I want to make sure I'm bringing this out there with a lot of the optimistic things I'm saying. We don't know, and we won't know till time goes on. But I wanted to again, make sure I address that one. So as things begin to open up, what we're seeing here, and we saw it play out in California over this last week or so, is these kind of two ideas. So the government shuts everything down in different degrees, right? And they didn't fully understand the impacts of what they did. And truly, again, I'm not going to fault anyone. If you go back and look at it, the Democrats got it wrong. Public statements, it's no big deal, COVID, it's no big deal back in January and February. The Republicans got it wrong. Public statements, it's not acknowledging it's a big deal. The president got it wrong. The World Health Organization got it wrong. And even Dr. Fauci got it wrong. All recorded public statements. Why? The data coming to us from where it originated was not accurate. And nobody fully understood the seriousness and the scope of what happened. So when I say the things I say about the decisions made, I'm not putting fault anywhere, because I believe strongly nobody really, truly understood it and the significance of it. It came to our shores. The outbreak went from a nursing home in Washington. At the time, again, it's been here a lot longer. We all know at this point, they're already finding cases going back as far as December now. But the official cases in this period of time, it wasn't known. Outbreak in Seattle, it spread, it started getting out. Everyone shut everything down. In the absence of information and not knowing how serious it can get, and the modeling being so horrific, I believe California, Governor Newsom said something like 26 million people would be seriously ill, hospitalized. I mean, you get these kind of numbers as someone in charge, you're shutting it down. You don't want to have the death on your hands. Now that none of these worst case scenarios have even close to materialized, any of the models at this point, what do we do to prevent the other devastation, the social devastation, the health, non-COVID related health, when people are not getting the proper medical care, either not getting preventive or elective care. The social aspects, the mental health, again, we have talked about this before, and the family relationships, the education for the children and for the college students. And I'll also go over to the economic, because the people, again, are affected most by this economically are the small business owners and the people at the lower end of the earning scale. Those are the people being devastated in these environments. And that's what the governors now have to pull. How do we pull out of this and balance all of this is a great, great challenge. So with respect to all of our politicians in this manner, it's a tough call, and they did the best. The unwinding is the challenge, because there's competing interests here. On one end of the scheme, lock it all down, never open it up until there's not one single case. The other end of the scale, economic damage is too great. We have to open it all up now. We never should have done it to begin with. So we have that libertarian American streak of independence and self-choice and whatnot, combined with people saying one life, and even one life, we can't do it. The reality is it's going to have to be somewhere in between. There must be ways to protect the most vulnerable and allow the economy to grow, because we don't have enough money as a nation, cannot print enough money as a nation to support everybody for however much period of time there'll be until we have a vaccine. And that's the reality of it. And that's what the governors are going through. So California had that when we're going to keep it closed down for another month. There was significant protests, including, again, counties that said we're not going to comply. The governor, I would imagine, rethought it, talked to some people, and decided on a way that he could open up potentially cautiously. But he actually also even said it's kind of up to the counties. So even he did a lot what the president did. The president left it to the states. He's leaving it to the counties. He'll obviously oversee it, make sure it makes sense. But going forward, this is where I'm going to get in the economic point again. Here's where the challenge comes. If you're a company, let's say in a state that's opening, you have a competitive advantage over everyone around you. If someone can't produce what you can, you're going to capture market share. So you imagine this. Imagine if you have a business and a giant meteor hit your competitor's business, blew it up. You now have the potential for those customers. And that's what's going to happen in states and counties that are slower to open. The business will be grabbed by their competitors, and it will make it much more of a challenge for them to open. And this matters to the governors and the states because that's where the revenue comes from. So I think as some states open and do so successfully, maybe that 2 weeks passes or whatever period of time they're using, you're going to start to see more open. And the more open, the confidence starts to build. So imagine this, even on an individual level, as I've said many times, 2/3 of our economy is consumer spending money. If you're scared, you don't spend money. The money's there. Our M2 money supply went up by over 40%. I think it's the number. Yeah, 40%. It's massive amount of money sitting on balance sheets. Cash. Companies have pulled in debt. They have cash. They're hoarding it. Individuals and businesses. It was never this way before. The last time we did this type of stimulus in 2008 and 2009, what happened? It's interesting. There was no extra money. It wasn't put into cash. It was just keeping people alive. Right? It was keeping businesses alive. So everybody clamped down. That's why we got no inflation. This time, the cash being hoarded, which means as confidence returns, whether it's the government opening things up and allowing businesses to open, or individuals saying, hey, I think I feel secure enough now to go out and actually take my family somewhere or do this or that. Not everybody will jump into the pool at the same time. People who are vulnerable or are fearful will take longer than people who are confident and are only restricting themselves because they're forced to. Again, by the policies in place. And why this matters is that there's a lot to be said for, I don't want to call it peer pressure, but kind of what people around you are doing somewhat influence it. If everyone around you is wearing a mask, even when they're walking around on the streets outdoors, or staying in their homes that are very, very isolated, you would be more likely to find that okay and comfortable. If people around you start to open up, you would be more likely to, again, in a way that is safe for you, that you feel comfortable, open up as well. If your neighbor on each side of the street decides they're going to take their family on a summer vacation and they come back and they don't have the virus and they had a great time and they tell you about it incessantly, your kids are going to want to go on vacation. These things, when you see the risk diminishing, you'd be more likely to jump in the pool. When and how this will happen, don't know. But there's a lot of industries right now that are ready and companies ready to go. The balance sheets are strong. They're great investments, and they're also going to do fine through this. Every business that fails, others will succeed. We have creative destruction. When I say this, I'm in no way diminishing the effects that this has on small businesses and large as well in this environment. But there will be this transformation in business, this creative destruction, as we've had in the previous times before. There's areas to invest right this minute. There's areas to invest going forward, like within the next year, next couple of months, next year. And there's long-term disruptions that will likely go away and we'll never really use them again in the same way, and that will be massively successful. And you're seeing that right now. This is something I stress. I'm looking at all of my clients. It's in your portfolio or it will be in your portfolio. The changes have been made or in the process of being made. For everyone else, it's highly individualized because it depends on what else is going on as far as how you should invest. I'm going to take a mini break here and look at some of the questions because a whole gazillion came in, and then a couple of ones I was supposed to address here as well. So please put your questions in here because my goal is to only talk with what I think is most pressing, but I really want to, again, focus on what everyone's interested in. So, pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and drugs like Gilead and others. Okay. That's a tricky area. That's a good thing to talk about. It's a race to figure out, okay, there's treatments, okay, things that minimize the effects, and I'm not even going to begin to say their names because I will blotch every single one of them. Excuse me. So there are things that will are minimizing the effects and increasing the survival rate. There's that batch of drugs. Some of them are pretty far along in the FDA process right now. And there's others that are vaccine. As you can imagine, pretty much everybody in the world with a degree in this area is racing to find these solutions, racing. But what I'm not 100% sure about what the financial benefits might be. And I'll tell you why. It costs a lot of money to develop vaccines. That's the reason we don't have vaccines pre-developed, and that's the reason because they're good for that specific strain. We use them, and then a new strain comes out, and they're not good. There's a lot of expense to develop them, not a lot of money in normal times. I would imagine, again, this is a bit of an assumption I'm making here. I can't back this with anything, that whoever figures out what the vaccine is, that person is almost going to be, it's a global emergency. I think they're going to be expected to give it, not profit off of it. Now, I can imagine the governments will cover their costs and their expenses. That would be a fair thing to do. But any company that tries to profit off of the vaccine in a meaningful way, I don't see that happening from a optics standpoint of what that's going to look like, as well as the fact I think it's going to be, hey, this is a global emergency. We'll pay your expenses, but you're not going to make profit. So I want to say that it's not like a lifestyle drug. It's not like something people are going to have to take the rest of their lives. I don't know that these companies necessarily be massively profitable, but it'll be a great PR thing. And the stock, and many of these companies that are close have been going up quite a bit. So I'm watchful on whether that's a wise investing thing. However, overall, the sector, this is an area that governments around the world are going to have a lot of focus on, because I think everybody understands this is not going to be the last time, and we want to be better prepared. Well, I'm going to say as a nation, around the world, I'm sure, but as a nation, we want to be better prepared. This is a national security issue. And when a country can withhold information on such an infectious disease and it spreads all over the world, and we have basically no defense against it and no plan and no preparation, it's a valuable lesson. It's a lot like we changed things after 9/11. Things will be changed going forward after this. But yes, as far as individual investments, it's sort of a guess at this point about what that will look like from a profit matter. Best advice, okay. This one, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give this on a high level, and I'm also going to tell you, please reach out to me. Okay, wherever you got this invitation from, get my contact information and reach out, because this is highly personal, and I want to give you direct advice to help you. Okay, because this I can feel the need here in my heart. I'm going to read it to everybody though, because you posted it here and your name's not present. What's the best financial advice for a stay-at-home mom of 24 years who's going through a divorce? Husband has refused to work for the last 16 months and is still unemployed. This is a financial planning topic. There are solutions for this. There are some ideas, but your individual case will matter. I will help you. I will point you in the right direction. Okay? Please just reach out to me and I will answer this much more personal way. What do you think the real estate market will do here in California in the coming months? Here's a fascinating thing. Okay, so I talk obviously to my clients. There's two things that I can see in the real estate market. I want to just preface this with, I'm an economist. I have a broad level understanding. I am not an expert in real estate. So this is definitely something you want to talk to real estate experts, whether they be agents, mortgage professionals, and whatnot, for specific advice to your situation, because there's a lot of variables in communities. On a high level, as a broad economic view, in this area, the Bay Area, something I'll say, two things I see that will change. Airbnbs and VBROs, the reason for doing them has changed fundamentally, because now the government can and will shut you down if they decide they want to. It's already been somewhat of an issue in Santa Cruz, where they're basically saying you're taking housing stock away from local people. I'm sure this argument has been played out in many areas, and kind of resisting that or trying to make limitations on it to begin with. Well, now in this environment where it was basically shut down in many communities, people's reasons for having a property strictly to be a VBRO or Airbnb is maybe not as financially viable. If there's debt on those properties, it actually could even potentially put them in a financially precarious position. So you may see more of those coming on the market. It doesn't mean it's going to crash and burn. Everybody's going to get cheap beach houses, however, because something else has changed with this environment. A lot of people have figured out that what was really attractive a couple of months ago, at least in Silicon Valley, was a condo close to the railroad tracks on the peninsula. And those things were selling, I'm not kidding you, for in some cases closer to $1 million, or at least $800,000-900,000. a condo by the railroad tracks. Stunning. But why? The commute. The major employers are there. People don't want a house, they want a yard. They just want to have a place close to work. And that's why. But that works really well when you're not in the house a lot. When you're forced to shelter in place, and now you and your spouse and perhaps your kids and your dog are trapped in that place 24/7, and you're both trying to do your Zoom work, together, and the kids are doing the schoolwork, by video conferencing, all of a sudden that small place is not working. So there's a push. I'm hearing it from my clients. They're like, when this is over, I am moving to a bigger place. So, and if we can telework, if this becomes something more common, a lot of technology companies do it because it's great for the environment, it's great for their employees' quality of life, and they just can, you could potentially see more people moving out of highly concentrated urban areas into more suburban. You could potentially see that. And this is just high-level data of expectations economically. It also is what I'm hearing from people. So it may balance out. You may see a shift of people moving around. I don't really see it, provided that, again, things go as expected. One risk factor to the real estate market that we can't put our arms around yet is the governments allowing for, and I'm going to use the wrong word here again and get corrected, I'm sure, mortgage deferral, mortgage forgiveness, rent deferral, rent forgiveness. That's going to really change certainly the real estate investments. As far as an investment, if you have a situation where the government could say, oh yeah, your tenant doesn't have to pay you for 3 months. Now, obviously you should be planning for something like that because your tenant could also move out and take you 3 months to get a new tenant. But what if the 3 months becomes 6 months or 9 months? What if it's a consistent thing? Right now, they're supposed to pay back by the end of the year, but I'm going to argue that most people who can't pay now are probably not going to have it by the end of the year. So will the government pay the the landlords? We don't know. So there's some variables here that we can't quite see that could have an effect, but I think it's more in the investing sector. I'm going to stop there because, like I said, there's a lot of people have more knowledge than me, but that's the two things I've seen so far. Okay, picking around here to another ones. Impact you see in the drop in state income from the gas, state tax, et cetera, committed expenses to pension, state employee salary, et cetera. Is there a tax? Yes. So about whether they raise taxes to compensate. They're going to try, most certainly. So right now, some cities are already preparing and are in some cases furloughing, much like they did in 2008, in that period of time, not 2008, the furloughing. Yes, they're hugely impacted. Kind of everyone's holding out for the big federal government payday at this point and trying not to do more than that than necessary. But it's going to be a challenge, and I'm almost certain that they're not going to get all the money that they're asking for because the numbers are eye-popping at what some of these states are asking from the federal government. So there's really only two options. There's three technically. They can raise taxes or they can cut expenses. Neither side is particularly politically attractive. Okay, so you can argue that neither one is. If you cut benefits too much, cut things too much, then you cause obviously political response to that. If you raise taxes, you also get response, but the response to that is generally less than the protesting idea and the voting idea and more of it, I'm leaving the state. California already has the highest taxes and some of the highest taxes in the nation. It's going to be really hard for cities to do that significantly. In California, we have another little wrinkle is pensions. The obligation of pensions technically are on the taxpayer. So they actually don't have a lot of choice. That's under the California Constitution. It's going to be really tricky to figure that one out. Now, you can always amend, of course, the Constitution and change that. But you have a difficulty when you have a state that has the highest tax in the nation, right next door to a state that has none on the state tax level. There could be some challenges, especially for businesses and whatnot. So it's going to be a challenge. The third way is issuing debt, issuing bonds. It's going to cost a lot of money, which is going to drag the abilities. This is also on a federal level too, not just California. It's going to drag the state's ability to do any more funding of any more programs. So basically, that's it. No more programs, no more anything. Perhaps no more train, no more social programs, whatever that has to be, cutting everything they can, issuing debt. The yield, interest on that debt is going to be high because they're going to be seen as somewhat risky, but that's the third way out. And I think that's where a lot of the pressure is coming to open up. I think I don't have Galvin Newsom's ear or anything like that, but when you have high-profile manufacturing companies saying to him, if you don't get this going, we're moving, and this did happen. I'm completely aware of the fact that this has happened. It's putting pressure because that's where your revenue is coming from. And so it's certainly, yes, Taxes may happen. Cut in services almost certainly happen. Issuing debt's the higher probability on that one, on a federal as well as state levels. What particular industries do you think would be good places to invest right now? Okay, good. Thank you for asking industries and not companies, because I'm not, as I've said before, for anyone who's new here, I'm not allowed to give investment recommendations in public forums. I can only do so privately. Industries that will do well. Okay, not going to be industry to do well. Technology. Be very careful on this though, because a lot of the things, I'm going to give you an example. People raced into what they thought the hot new things were going to be. Love Zoom. Been using Zoom since, well, actually, the beginning of the year, well before all this happened. However, the price of the stock in relation to earnings at this point, it's kind of a dicey thing to invest in. Amazon. Oh, everyone's shopping online. Buy Amazon. Amazon's numbers, amazing. Amazon's costs around coronavirus, equally amazing. Costs a lot of money when your supply chains are all messed up and you have to sanitize everything and protect your employees. There's a big expense to that. So it's tricky now because we have to fully understand what the costs to companies were in this time, even though that's behind us, future looking, who's going to be successful. How are things going to be doing things differently? It's definitely going to be in healthcare, specific areas of healthcare, because there's going to be a big focus on that. In financial services, certainly going to be a big focus in that. Technology, and of course the pharmaceutical biotechnology area. But know what you own. Don't just buy a big basket of it, because there's a lot of companies out there that look good at what they do, but their debt levels are horrific and they're not going to get bailed out. There's going to be a significant number of bankruptcies, even in publicly traded companies going forward. The market is pricing the future, but we haven't gotten to the bottom of the V yet on the true economy. Which, by the way, I got asked that question before. Is this going to be a V-shaped or a U-shaped or an L-shaped recovery? The stock market is going to be like the Nike swoosh, okay? Or maybe more like that square root thing, like that. Plummets, hops up, and then the remaining part's going to be slower. The economy hasn't even officially even gotten to the bottom yet. So there you go. The stock market and economy are two different things. So I want to make sure I'm referencing those two separately. Again, investments I can get into much more specifically on an individual level, because regulations, as well as I don't want to get too far into that to answer all the rest of the questions. California commercial real estate market look like, specifically medical or office space? Well, medical office space, I can imagine there's not going to be a lot of change. The need for medical care hasn't really changed, even during these times, right? The need for medical care is going to be there. So I don't think medical space is really a consideration. The biggest risk to the healthcare sector is whether it becomes government funded, paid for by the government, as in Medicare for all, or continues on as the way we're doing it now. But the need is not going away. In fact, as our population gets older, big chunk of baby boomers, the demand is going to be greater. That office space is going to be a little more challenging. Retail space is going to be very challenging. I think a lot. The first wave of bankruptcies we're seeing is pretty much all in the retail space. That I think is going to be the more challenging type things going forward. Again, just in case we have future shutdowns as more issues come up. Office space is going to be one that I'm kind of watching closely. If more people can work from home, is the need for office space as high? So as leases come up, I don't think companies, unless they go out of business or are seriously financially stressed, are going to walk away from their leases. I don't think having that investment now is a risk. But going forward, when a lease is up, do people need as many square footage? Can they have X% of the workforce working remotely or working in a lower cost area and doing things by video conferencing? For example, really good employee, they want to live and out in the Midwest or something like that, and they can still work for us. And now we've learned that we can do that because we've been doing it for the last couple of months. So I think office space, depending on the market, might be a bit of a challenge. But on the other side of that, and that's why you kind of have to watch as leases roll over, you're going to really get a sense of this. What we have to really watch at this point is companies who want to continue or need to continue using office space are going to need more of it. You're not going to have cubes and workbenches packed side to side, because I think there's going to be an idea of social distancing is probably going to go on for a long time. It may not be mandated, but it's going to be expected. It may not be mandated for all society by the government, but it may be required in the workplace. I can say that for a longer period of time, because remember, we will have more infectious and communicable diseases, and people are going to be really, really scared about it. So that I think that might even be put into in a more permanent basis into a lot of workplace requirements and laws. So in that case, would people who need office space need more to properly separate the workers? time to watch. I wouldn't be running out and buying it at the moment, but I wouldn't also be panicking about it. See how watch the leases roll over and see where that works. In addition to if you own it, commercial office space, or thinking to invest in it, how flexible is your floor space? Has a lot to be done with it. So you're charging per square foot. It's up to the tenant to decide how many employees they're going to put in there. So if you have fixed space that you can't move around, that's close together, is going to be a different story than if you can easily reconfigure people stack side to side to wider spread groups. Again, if you have questions, make sure you send them in because we're getting closer to the end of our time. Another question, what about China? Did they lie to us about the extent of the virus, and what do you think the U.S. response will be? Wow, that one, I don't really know any more probably than's in the news. I think it's clear by the rest of the world that China was not fully forthcoming about all of the information that they released on the virus, not only to the U.S., but even to the World Health Organization in the initial stages of this. We still to this day don't know the extent. We actually truly don't even know exactly where it came from. I know the news has stated that the two ideas is it was completely, it came from a bat or something out of nature, I guess bit a person and spread that way. I apologize, I'm not going to get this exact. Or did it get out of a lab? The only thing I think at this point's been, I think, universally agreed on, again, I'm not an expert here to say, is that it probably wasn't human created, but did they have it, they were testing it and they got loose, from a lab and spread, and that's how it got out in the world. So these are, kind of the question marks, but it's all known it came out of China. It's known it came from China. It was known that the information the severity of it was suppressed for a period of time, and that's how it was able to become so widespread for all this period of time. So that's, I think, pretty universally agreed on. Sorry if I ruffle any feathers with that. I think that there is an investigation going on. It's done by multiple countries. I think that what we're hearing in the news is not the whole story. I would imagine a lot of this is being kept very private, as I know the EU is in the process of reviewing the data. I know Australia said they're on board with whatever the final results were. I think that there's a distinct possibility if enough large economic powers come together and agree on the results of the data or the investigations, you could see a type of world court, the world versus China type of thing for reparations of some kind, given the significant financial devastation. We have 184 countries and counting. So I can see that being somewhat of a big trial of the century of holding China accountable for it in some way or some fashion or another. And that's distinctly possible. I mean, the investigations there, it seems to be at least looked at by a lot of countries, but I think it's way too soon to say who's going to participate and what it's going to look like. I will say, one thing that's already happening, and it was kind of already happening before all this, is moving supply chain dependence out of China. The part of it was around the trade war and the things going on with that, the uncertainty of the future there. But supply chains moving out of China to other countries. Despite what our president says, we can't bring it all home. Remember, before all this happened, we had 3.1% unemployment. 3.1%. We don't have enough people to bring it all home. That's not going to happen. We can bring a lot home. We can do a lot of things differently, but we're almost certainly going to work with other countries. And one country I think bears very close watching is the UK. The UK did the Brexit. I mean, it's still unwinding technically, but it's official. The Brexit happened. They're their own country. And we have a lot of similarities between us. We have a close relationship, and I can see us building some type of trade arrangements or agreements. The same thing with Japan and many other countries out there. So I see it more of a shift is going to happen, regardless of any other, whatever world court or other actions taken against China, of less dependence and doing less work with them. In addition to the fact that there could be a pushback towards Chinese-made goods by consumers. And if that's the case, given everything that's happened. And again, I want to make it very clear, I'm talking about the country and the economy, not the people. Okay, nobody please misunderstand what I'm saying. It's a country and the economy. So goods made in China, people may not want to support. And that would mean retailers and other companies be less likely to use them. These are all possibilities. I don't feel like I know how this will play out, but I would look at those two things as being distinct. What will drive countries to want to take action against China is the fact that they could get some money, some payment, some reparations for the damage. And what it'll also do is set a very, very clear and important message of the importance of, if this happens in your country, that's what we need to get it out there and stop it before it gets more severe. And some countries are much more forthcoming than other countries, but maybe it sends kind of a very important lesson that there's a response if you don't do it next time. And so that's the best I can say on the China aspect. Okay, next one here. Is there any talk of auto insurance refunds in California? Don't know about refunds, but I do know auto insurance companies have been reducing. I think even maybe the state even required them to, but even before that, they were actually proactively doing it. Would definitely, if you haven't heard from your car insurance company, it is based on miles driven, and I know that they were intentionally going out and saying, hey, if you're not driving, you qualify for reduction. Don't know exactly how that looks, but I certainly think it's worth checking into because it is something that's been in the news. Okay, next question. Do you think there'll be a second wave? If so, what will it do to the economy? I'm assuming you mean second wave of coronavirus. I don't know any more than anyone else that there'll be a second wave. I kind of mentioned earlier, I think as we test more people, the numbers are going to go up exponentially. They'll be maybe in the millions. I don't know. Again, I'm not a scientist here. The numbers will go up. I really think the most important thing to do is to watch the death rates. And the reason being is that we weren't tracking the main belief right now, and I say the mainstream belief with everyone is it's been here since November, December in this country, but we weren't testing or checking for it. So since the time we started testing or checking for it, we have kind of the death rates, and then we have the curve and all the rest of things everybody has heard about extensively in the news. So what do we want to see going forward is what do those look like? But I would say if the second wave of cases is going to come just from more testing. And it will be almost impossible to know if more people got infected because of the fact so many are asymptomatic and so many are not tested. I don't really think the results of more cases is very valid or important. I think the hospitalization rates and the death rates, we always have known that. We just didn't know that. As long as we've been testing them for coronavirus, we've known that. Because sick people go to the hospital. For the most part, I know there are exceptions. Sick people generally go to the hospital, and sick people, people who die are all being tested at this point, mostly being tested for it. Watch those numbers to the second wave. Yes, it's going to be a big deal depending on where it plays out. Is it an isolated little pocket, or is it widespread again? And it will have big economic effects and impacts. Unfortunately, it's something that can happen between now and when we have a vaccine. So it could be years down the road. It doesn't have to be months for it to resurge. And there's a lot of theories, a lot of ideas, a lot of opinions. I don't think I'm qualified to say which one's right or wrong. What about the World Health Organization? Not sure if this question is what about them in relation to their role in all of this. Because there is some theories out there that they knew a lot more than they led on to and didn't fully release it because they were kind of working closely with China. Or what about their role going forward in such things? I don't really feel qualified to answer that one as well. I do think that when I talked a little bit earlier about the fact that everyone pretty much dropped the ball on this, they were one of the people that dropped the ball. If you look back at their releases on the information, they did not really explain fully what was going on and the risks of it. You can look it all up. I don't want to, again, put blame on anyone. I'm just saying that nobody really got this right back when the outbreak started. Going forward, what their role will be, I don't know. I know the president a while back said he was going to cut funding pending an investigation as to why that happened, why they didn't alert the world or disclose fully what was going on. I don't know how that investigation is getting done, who's doing it, what the conditions are to get the money back, or if it's a done deal. I don't know the details about that. But I would like to know why the one organization that's supposed to be on top of this didn't know or didn't disclose. I'd be curious to know that as well. Because again, we don't want this to happen again. How do we? After 9/11, we tried to find all ways possible to prevent it from happening again. How can we do it in this case? So that would be really good. Someone just sent me a message saying Geico dropped everyone 15%. So there you go. If you have Geico, you have your answer. Another question. How will this affect the elections? Ooh, this is a big one. Okay. We don't know how this will affect the elections as far as who's likely to win or not win, or even how the elections will happen. And some people even say, will they happen? Yes, the elections will happen. The question is how. I think there's a high probability that elections will go, in California at least, largely as always have. You can vote by mail. You can go to the ballot box. You can vote California has so many different ways to vote. I can't speak for what other states will do, but I see no scenario in which the elections won't happen. Who will win? if you can look at history as a guide, I will say it has a lot more to do with how this plays out. During times of during times of national emergency, the incumbent, it's all how they handle it. It depends on their reelection prospects. So that adds a lot to it. How will the nation perceives Trump's handling of COVID-19 and everything surrounding it? How will that be perceived in relation to how it would be assumed? I'm going to say Biden because I'm just going to go with I know he's the presumptive nominee, but just assuming Biden is the nominee. How Biden would have handled it. Now, the easy thing is that if you're the person in charge, you have how you handled it. So everyone in the world can see it, right? And of course, opinions will be made based on people's partisan beliefs, but it's knowable. With the other hand, it's up to Biden to convince people he would have done things differently or better. And people would have to be convinced that he would be the right one. But that's not the only thing going on in the world, so it's not the sole reason that people make the decision. So I think a lot has to do with how, because I don't think anybody well, I shouldn't say that nowadays because everything's so partisan. There's probably people out there that think this. For the most part, people don't say Trump caused it. It's Trump's fault that coronavirus came to the U.S. We can all argue about how it was handled and whatnot, but so it's not something as opposed to something seen as directly his responsibility, like the economy if there wasn't a COVID or whatnot. That's going to be the challenge, and his end is going to be really how he handles, how he's perceived to handle it. And I don't even remotely feel qualified to try and pick who's going to win. In fact, I usually get it wrong when I think I know, so I'm just not even going to go there. And I honestly think it's too soon to tell. It's too soon to tell, and we'll know a lot more when it comes close. But I don't think there's any reason elections won't go as planned. I don't have any reason to believe that. There are many different ways to vote. At least, again, in California and other states, we'll probably have to pick it up. Okay, another question here. There's a bunch of them, so just a moment here. Can you talk about PPP and companies misusing the funds and or scams? Yeah, well, there's certainly, anytime the government throws a whole bunch of money out to people, there are going to be people who are going to be misusing it. Well, there are people that misuse all the government programs out there, even well-established ones, various stimulus programs, welfare, etc. There's always going to be the scammers. There's always going to be people that misuse it. But I will say there's another thing that makes it confusing is when it first came out, and I helped a lot of businesses navigate this space, a lot. So understand, when it first came out, what you needed to do to qualify was very vague, okay? You basically, on a high level, you needed to have the funds for COVID-related reasons, and I'm paraphrasing a lot of stuff here. For COVID-related reasons, you needed the funds to keep your employees employed. Provided you use, I believe, 80% of it towards payroll, you would have that portion forgiven, whatever you use towards payroll. The rest would be a 1% loan for some period of time. But it was really simple. Your employees, so much had to go to payroll, it had to be COVID-related while you needed the money. And you had less than 500 employees, and there was some other, very, very simple. So apply. If you were going to use it the way they wanted you to use it, and you've complied with the rules, apply. Well, we all know that many who applied didn't get at least the first round. But after the fact, it came out that technically, by the first ruling, because it was first rules, it was so vague, companies that had less than 500 per location could qualify. So then you heard the headline news, a very large restaurant chain applying and receiving the max. It was, I think 10 million was the maximum. They were getting these large dollars, right? Okay, well, that wasn't really the intention, what people said. The intention was to help small businesses. Well, it kind of wasn't. It was actually the intention of the PPP. There are other programs that were intended to help small business. The PPP was intended to keep people employed. That was it. And keep as many people employed to keep them through this program as opposed to going on unemployment, so businesses could quickly get them ramped up, keep their employees, keep them paid, and quickly ramp up as things recovered. It was the concept behind it. But it kind of got changed. It's supposed to be for small businesses, as well as small businesses didn't get as many of the loans as larger businesses for a lot of reasons. Some of it was banks favoring their customers who had loans with them, self-preservation, right? I want to focus on the people that owe me money to make sure I get paid back, as well as the preparation of many small businesses. Is it JP Morgan or Wells Fargo? Maybe it was Wells Fargo said, or JP Morgan. I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, said within 5 minutes of opening, their subscription amount was gone. So that's how quickly it was. So if you're a small business and you weren't prepared with all your documents in order and filling out the application, whatever, you didn't have a chance on the first round. Now the second round, they made changes to help with that. So that being said, is that it wasn't really clear. A lot of companies applied. A lot of companies found later, then they started increasing after the fact. Well, if this, you don't qualify. If this, you don't qualify. And now, I think about a week or so ago, they said, if you can get the money from any other source, you don't qualify. So now the businesses are like, ooh, wait a minute. Well, I could sell my house. What does that mean? Any other source? Are you good? Am I committing fraud here? What is it? It was a nature of, it was rolled out so quickly, there wasn't clarity. And there still isn't clarity this day. And the rules keep changing. So you can come back later and say, well, you could have sold your house, but that wasn't to get the money to pay your workers, but that wasn't what the intention of the original bill was. So yes, there's fraud. I think it was a story somewhere out in the Northeast where there's direct fraud. It's all a total scam to get the money. And there are companies that apply that really could have gotten the money from other sources, especially large publicly traded companies. And there are companies that applied because they really didn't know if they need it, and maybe at this point don't really need it. So I'm sure, again, they're putting a very close eye and very close watchdogs on this at this point. So I don't think we'll have a lot more of that going forward. But like anything else, they try and do it suddenly and quickly. We don't always know for sure. Okay, I'm coming down to the last of the questions here. As this is a global issue, it points towards universal oversight, more government cooperating with each other, bringing about national isolation, not just this country, but around the world. Different countries have approached this differently. What do you think? I think there's going to be both. I used to be both. I actually think that you're just going to shift a lot of alliances. That's going to happen 100%. But there is this sort of a collectiveness. We're in this together. With most, not all, okay, I'm going to kind of exclude China from this here, in this together. And there's a lot of that. I mean, when you see, Russia and America have not had good relations for a while. And when you see things, and I know this is all, political and this showmanship, but it's still kind of cool to say Russia in the beginning, when we got hit before they did, hey, we'll send you some supplies. And then when you see the U.S. saying, now Russia's getting, they're into the wave, we'll send you supplies. We're saying supplies. Countries that we didn't really get along well with, we're kind of working with. And I think going forward, there's going to be more cooperation on issues of this nature. But I also think that the countries are going to take competitive advantage of this. China would like nothing more than to be the number one economic superpower. They made this very, very clear. I'm not saying anything that they haven't made public. And that's partially why I think that there may have not been as much disclosure about this, because the concern is that would weaken them on the economic stage if people knew how bad it was. And then when we get into the wave, they thought, okay, we'll be able to rebuild. Well, the U.S. is suffering, and we'll be able to rebuild and get on top. And then they realize that all the rest of the countries are now shut down and nobody's buying goods from them. So their economies are shut down still to this time. Not because they don't want to open it, they don't have any customers. And again, that's an exaggeration. They do have some, but less than usual. So I think there's going to be a lot. Supply chains were destroyed within this country and outside of this country, destroyed. There's so much upheaval in our supply chains. You're seeing this in the grocery stores. Those are all being rebuilt to be a lot more flexible and adjustable. And I think those supply chains are going to reroute through a lot of other countries. So I think it's not going to fundamentally change. I think alliances and relationships are going to change. And some countries that we didn't do a lot of business with, we're going to do more, like Canada, like Mexico, like the UK. And countries that we've done a lot of business or work with because it was cheap and effective and we're going to do a lot less with. I think that's going to be, so it's not going to be this universal, we all get along and we're friends forever, which, would be the ideal solution for this. But I don't see it getting into a situation where we're more adversarial with one another. What about PPP for independent contractors? That has been the worst run, slowest rollout government program I've ever seen. I don't even think in California it's even fully happened. And that's, kind of stimulus as well as sort of what I call unemployment money for independent contractors. Again, it wasn't really well defined, and everyone's sort of taking this a little bit differently. And it really needs to get done because an increasing amount of our population are independent contractors, and they need to have this stimulus. So Galvin Newsom, I believe, is speaking tomorrow, and I believe this is one of the topics he's going to talk about, is some of the things that are happening with unemployment as well as this. So I want to say listen to him because sometimes he can be hard to listen to, but read the transcript afterwards and maybe there'll be a little bit more information there. I'll definitely look into it. And since I know who's asking this question, I'll follow up with you. Okay. Best financial advice you can give to us during these difficult times. Great. The last 5 minutes. Thank you. And I do not know who you are, but your timing is perfect. The best advice I can give is almost individual, but then universal at the same time, which is as follows. Financial planning in advance or during times of like this is one of the most important things that you can do. Planning for things like this. We believe we have so much more control over our lives than we really do. 2 months ago, when anyone listening to this, imagine that the government would shut down the economy almost entirely. Would anyone imagine we would be living the lives that we're living now? In your wildest dreams, it's like a Hollywood movie, right? You would never imagine that. We feel like we have so much more control over our lives than we really do. And so you can get stressed and frustrated and fearful and lost when you don't have control, or you can say, how can I plan for the times in which I don't have control? Now, this goes to all areas of your life. As you've heard me speak of before, the true thing that I love more than anything to see for all of my clients and the people I work with is to see that balance spiritually, and I know that can be a loaded word, take it for what it means to you, spiritually, mentally, physically, emotionally balanced, right? So there's a lot of emotion tied to money in addition to the economic or the financial standpoints of it. So planning financially is really important because my clients who plan, they're in such a different situation than people who don't plan. And that is the best advice I can give is planning and do it. And I know, and I don't want to be here tooting my own horn because that's not the intention of these webinars, but find a planner. If it's not me or my team, find a planner you can pay a flat fee for service and talk to them. And again, make sure that you can pay a fee for planning and don't have to worry about buying a product of any kind because that's usually not the right choice to begin with. In addition to that, is nobody can possibly know what to recommend without knowing a bit more about you. But understanding and planning for these things, because things are going to change. And I want to just touch briefly even upon things like education. One of the biggest expenses for many of my clients who have children is college education. I'm going to assure you colleges and the value of that and how that's paid for and how it's provided is going to change significantly. You should hear what they're talking about doing. And this is universal. It's going to be so different going forward. What people are going to pay for, how they're going to pay for it. It's going to be upended. How do you plan for that? How do you do things differently? There's so many pieces of the puzzle that my best advice is to do an individualized plan. It's not something you have to go and do your whole life story. You can do it in bits and pieces, but plan and understand. Because financial consciousness, the basic definition of consciousness is awareness and understanding. So awareness and understanding of how all of the parts of your financial life fit with the rest of your life and put that together. I know that sounds very esoteric and high level, but the individualized advice is key to understanding that. It's far more important, figuring out how all the pieces fit together and optimizing them and organizing them is more important than what you invest in, by far. And I'm saying this as an economist and a portfolio manager. In closing, I want to thank you again, all very much for attending today and all the people that will watch this after the fact. I've done a number of these webinars to different groups, but I will say my very favorite is to you because many of you are my clients. And while you know that you can talk to me anytime with any questions you have, in fact, I love it when you do because I love talking to people. I can't see you in person right now, but I really do enjoy our conversations a lot. I also want to be able to help people beyond my clients just to get a sense of confidence and ideas of the future. There are many, many great things that will happen from this time of disruption. And there are many changes that will happen that give opportunities where opportunities were not there before for many, many people. It's not all doom and gloom despite what we hear on the news every day. And I can back this up with data and information, which will be coming in upcoming webinars. So I really want to thank all of you for spending your hour with me today to listen to what I have to say, for the questions that you brought. If you have more questions, don't hesitate. Send them to the person where you got this link or this information or me directly, and I will answer those questions directly. And is in addition to sending supporting documentation if you're not sure of anything I said. And I would say, and I cannot express enough in words the level of gratitude and that I have. Sorry, I can't even come up with all the words here. The level of gratitude and thankfulness and that I have and your trust in me and the work that I do. know that this is my life's work. Know that I'm watching every day. Know that I'm making the changes as necessary. I try not to bother you with a lot of it, but I am available when you have questions. And many of you know I love talking about it, so definitely ask. I'm going to close today with a quote. This is not my quote, but I think it's really relevant for these times because we have so much fear and so much worry and so much concern. If not for ourselves, then for our loved ones and people you care about, especially the most vulnerable members of our population. Okay? You guys have heard me say this before. I can't wait for the day I get to hug my mom again. I really, really can't. Mother's Day is coming up. I got to figure out what I'm going to do super cool when I can't actually touch her. That being said, here's a quote. Too many humans have stopped living their passion as they argue for their limitations within a web of fear. I don't know why that really touched me so much, but it made me think of the environments that we're in, not just now, but in general. We limit ourselves. We argue with ourselves on those to limit ourselves because of the web of fear. So to the degree you can and are comfortable doing so, break through some of that web of fear and find what can I do differently for myself and others to have a sense of confidence and optimism towards the future. Still feet on the ground, still practicality. We still have to take care of business, but to have a positive and optimistic outlook towards the future. We will all get to a great future and we'll get there together. And I strongly, strongly believe that. With that being said, I'm going to let everybody go for this afternoon. I'll do another one of these in 2 weeks. If you have ideas or suggestions about areas you'd like me to talk about in addition to the economy, please let me know. Also, too, I'm looking at possibly having speakers here and there just in case people are starting to get sick of me talking. Oh, your advice, your guidance, your ideas and input are really important to me, so please send it and let me know. Thank you all very much, and I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. All right, bye.